Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Look, we're diving into something totally wild today. We're going to objectively decode this incredibly intense, deeply esoteric text called the divine script of psychological persecution. Now, right off the bat, I gotta tell you, we're looking at a completely unconventional worldview here. It's this massive, tangled web of extreme surveillance, heavy behavioral psychology, and overarching theological judgment. It's actually a fascinating look into how hyper-specialized frameworks are built to make sense of human suffering. Our goal today, not to validate it, definitely not to debunk it, but just to map out exactly what this text is claiming. So, let's untangle this labyrinth of ideas together.
Since this material's seriously dense, here's our quick roadmap for the explainer. First, we'll look at the psychological victim, then observation and conditioning, followed by redefining sin and justice, the game of mind control, and finally, God's script and salvation.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the psychological victim. So the text sets up this huge fundamental duality right from the start. On one side, you've got this benevolent force, right? God, essentially watching the individual to help them evolve, to love and to grow spiritually. But then, you have the flip side. This is contrasted super sharply with mortal psychologists and behaviorists. And here's the kicker. According to the author, these professionals aren't watching you to help. They are observing you specifically to create and project what they call abnormal cases. The claim here is that they use long-term data collection to condition people, actively projecting faults onto them instead of, curing them. In this worldview, observation isn't passive. It's literally a weaponized act.
Moving right along to Section 2, observation and conditioning.
Okay, so how does this actually happen? Well, according to the excerpts, victims face intense psychological persecution through some really specific mind-bending methods. We're talking total sensory invasion. The text mentions the use of recorded voices and images, and even claims that behaviorists project explicit, pornographic tapes or gestures just to manipulate the victim. It gets even wilder. It introduces this idea of being framed by gadgets and subjected to direct psychomotor control. I mean, it reads like a Cold War sci-fi thriller, right? It definitely echoes some of that real-world paranoia from projects like MKUltra. The author is basically painting a picture of an inescapable tech-driven nightmare where every single move you make is scrutinized and controlled by unseen forces.
And that brings us to this idea of the pulsar of death. I know, intense name, right? But it's absolutely crucial to the argument. The text claims that physical and psychological injuries are being deliberately inflicted on people. And why? To literally force a behavioral response from the victim. It suggests psychiatrists are manipulating this trauma to persecute someone to death. It's a really profound, raw expression of feeling completely at the mercy of hostile observers. The big takeaway for us here is seeing just how extreme feelings of victimization can snowball into these deeply intricate systemic theories of persecution.
Which perfectly sets up our third section, redefining sin and justice.
Now, normally, when we think of sin, we think of personal stuff, right? Lying, stealing, personal flaws. But this text completely flips that on its head. In this specific worldview, sin is entirely structural. It's institutional. Here, sin is defined simply as not giving justice or actively hiding facts. But the biggest sin of all, causing harm to someone with the specific intention of proving you possess the superior seeds of God's mind. Yep. The author argues that these quote-unquote sinners use false allegations and those high-tech gadgets we just talked about to frame their victims. So the true perpetrators of sin aren't the people struggling. They're the ones pulling the strings of this psychological persecution just to prove their own intellectual superiority.
Let's slide into Section 4, the game of mind control.
When this text talks about a game, make no mistake, this is absolutely not being played for fun or standard rewards. It's strictly about domination. The ultimate goal of all this mind control, according to the excerpts, is to entirely wipe out modern beliefs. The author actually believes that standard, everyday words and beliefs literally program humans into slavery. So this incredibly painful game of observation and control, its whole purpose is to overwrite those beliefs, crushing conventional thought patterns and forcing a complete mental submission.
And that leads us to our final theological conclusion in Section 5, God's script and salvation. Here is the absolute crux of the whole thing. The author views all of this intense persecution not as some random chaotic bad luck, but as a deliberate divine simulation. The text explicitly says the world is not a random quantum choice of suffering. It's almost like a dark theological version of the Matrix. Intelligent humans are being purposefully dropped into these simulated, agonizing scenarios. The psychological torment basically forces them to react,
proving their sins right out in the open so they can face divine judgment. So in the end, all of this psychological torture is framed as one massive cosmic test.
And the excerpts wrap up with a truly chilling ultimatum orchestrated by this divine script. When the persecution hits its absolute peak, there are only two ways out. Faithful minds, the ones who navigate the simulation, who keep their spiritual integrity no matter how bad the manipulation gets, they are promised salvation. The alternative? For those who break and fail the test of this brutal psychological game, it's simply death.
So we're going to leave you with this final provocative question straight from the core of the text. Is human suffering a random quantum choice or the fulfillment of a divine script to judge our sins? It really invites us to think about the incredibly complex, almost unbelievable frameworks the human mind can construct just to find meaning, structure, and justice when faced with profound psychological pain. Well, that's a wrap for today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the structures of the world around you, and we'll see you next time.